So let's start with your story. I've read a little bit about it on the website, but if you wouldn't mind, talk about your story and how you started the company and why augmented reality and virtual reality.
Well, basically, those are three different questions. Those are three different questions. So the thing is that I was actually born in the end of the 70s. In the end of the 70s, in the Soviet Union, there was such a country at that time, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
So in the western part of it, and my mom and dad my mom was an engineer and my dad was a university professor. And at some point, the dad got a contract to work in Poland that was outside of the Soviet Union, more or less at that time. Basically, I moved there with my parents at the age of 6 and 7, as far as I remember. And I still remember that. And that was the time when I first saw a computer. It was like mid-80s. Right, so it was nothing like that around, and I saw a computer, and I saw computer games, and I became addicted because you could imagine how those wooden Soviet toys, and a computer club. So basically, we have never been. The parents were never doing too well in terms of the money. So my first computer appeared at my house when I was a third or fourth year university student. Actually, that was the time when I got my first job. Actually, my second job. So my first job was selling TV sets in a local shop, and the second one was connected to internet. I found a company that was somehow promoting the internet, but I didn't stay there for more than a couple of months. I was approached by guys from Intel, which is Intel Inside, the company that makes semiconductors, and they were in search of somebody who would help them to promote internet over the new emerging markets. And so they found a student who was who was all about computers, but also all about the business education. And I still believe that the guy, that one of the Intel's regional managers who found me, was just too lazy to interview too many people. So I was lucky to get a job. And you can understand this. You can probably imagine the social lift. So just getting employed by the multinational company at that time in this country, which was just emerging to be an independent country, and so on and so forth. And the system around was crashing, and the economy was just going up and down, and mostly down. And I got this type of employment. So I immediately appeared in the center of the technology, right? So and Intel was a great place to pick up all the nice working culture. I learned how they approach their tasks, how they still retain the spirit of this technology startup. I didn't even know a name of the word startup at that time, but it looked exactly like they look now. Like everybody was really enthusiastic about what they do. They were organized in nice and mobile and agile small groups. And the word agile was not in the air, but still it was what was later called agile working processes, and so on and so forth. So by the time when this project and this employment was over in 3 years, and it was over because basically the project was over. I actually had a very simple choice: either go working for one of the local firms for a fraction of salary, or start doing something myself. And the choice was obvious. And basically, it was not much of a business. It was mostly having fun. Like we were pioneering this internet sphere in Belarus, like selling web hosting, selling whatever was sellable, just staying on the top of the wave. And this was the time when we approached the theme of the software development, right? And a huge milestone on this way was approaching BBC, which was doing a geo-information system, which was actually trying to organize ecological content throughout the UK. And that was another milestone when we learned about the software development processes. Actually, I learned about software development processes, about project management, and so on and so forth. And basically, that was nothing to do about AR and VR at that time. It was mostly software. But what I learned was how to do software properly, what is the organization for that, what is the culture for that, the importance of being well trained and well educated, and so on and so forth. After that, there were a few experiments about AR and VR. Actually, I still remember there was some kind of VR helmet trying to get into the market, VFX1. It was many years ago. Also, Google was making attempts with their goggles or Google Glass, right? Yeah. Which never hit the market probably. Then we played a bit with Epson Mavaria glasses, which was already a historical, what we call historical period, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But basically the concept wasn't new. So several years ago, when we were thinking about how we will reposition the company as competition was growing up, we picked up several domains where we want to be mature and where we want to be really professional. Because HQ used to be a typical software developer, right? Typical contracted software developer, and you cannot just be selling software development service because there is a million of companies like that. You need to focus on something. And that my background, that my childhood experience with computer gaming actually drove me to this VR stuff and so on and so forth, and AR stuff, because it's cool. So I looked at that. I thought that, well, at some point the hardware will be ready. So we need to make a footprint in this new technology, in this new domain, in this new universe. Nobody called it universe at that time. And so we started building up competence, like trying to understand what technology you need to do, what are the specific challenges to overcome, and so on and so forth. We tried building, and basically what drove me exactly to the learning part was another customer, which was actually an quite innovative manager from Germany. His name was and still is Alex. Actually, he works for a company that produces emission testing equipment. Emission testing equipment, and they build laboratories for major car producers. And their challenge was and is that the technology they sell and the equipment they sell is quite complicated. So they need to educate their users how to implement this equipment, right? And the challenge is that their training team just cannot fly as much as needed to give training to whoever is needed, because as sales grow and as the new laboratories are being built. So sending a pair of goggles looked a better alternative for them to give proper training, proper education for the users, so they get the most of their equipment. We tried doing that. It was, let's say, partially successful, again, because the JavaScript stuff and other technology stuff was not really up to the task at that time. Also, Epson Mavaria goggles have never been really good to recognize the equipment. So you basically, in order to fulfill the task, you need to recognize the machine, and you need to properly position the buttons and switches and so on and so forth, and highlight them so the person will do the proper manipulations in AR. So the hardware was not really ready. But we managed to play a bit with that. We managed to learn on how it works. And we also approached a few other use cases like American Telegraph and Telecom that we never won because they were and they still are too big for us. But we managed to talk to people who are doing VR training, who actually were doing VR trainings for that company. And they shared a business case stating that they saved about $200,000 on self-insurance of their vehicles like cars that their employees drive, just by giving them proper education regarding regarding driving and texting. So basically, you can still find this application on Oculus Store. It's called It Can Wait. So it's pretty simple. It has nothing interactive in it. It's just a video where you sit in a driver's seat of the car, and you constantly text, and then at some point the biker comes out, at some point the pedestrian comes out, but in the end of the movie you get killed. Just because you haven't noticed the truck that is going from the other side of a crossroad. So they say that after this, they shared that after this video, they got dramatic decrease in the number of car accidents. So basically, at that point, I understood that together with this experience with AR education, all this domain should bring really good money to both to the customers, so we can bring good value to the customers, and we should always also earn quite well on that. So that's what we can say about AR education, VR education. What was actually also found by us was that the guys who received VR training actually value it more than face-to-face training. Together with the situation when sending VR goggles, a pair of VR goggles is much cheaper than sending a training team. So basically, VR gets better results, lower costs, and what else do you need, right? So there definitely is a business case. So we start moving into that.
That's great, and it's great that you highlighted the value proposition of VR in the training environment. Talk a little bit about the key factors that go into building a successful workplace education program. What do companies need to keep in mind?
Well, basically, I would say that the greatest challenge of all that is to make the whole educational team, a whole production team work together. Because we are a technology company, so we come in to pick up and work on the knowledge and deliver the knowledge that somebody already has to possess, right? So when we make a trainer on how to paint a car, for example, it's a life story. We don't actually know how to paint a car. We need actually two guys. Basically, every educational process is combined of three main players, three main actors. One is the guy who has a knowledge. Another one is the guy who knows how to deliver the knowledge, the learning method specialist. And the third one is actually the guy who technically implements that. Right. So basically, I had at this point I got really big help from my father, who still is a university professor. So he knows a lot about how to deliver knowledge to even the most stupid students, like me, for example. So basically, the main challenge is between the guy who possesses the knowledge and the guy who does technical implementation of that. Okay. And the role of the person who is on the learning methods is usually shared between us and the customer. If you understand what I mean. So basically, we cannot possess their knowledge as any service company. We need to somehow translate it into the form that is understandable for the developers, so they can implement it. It's like doing typical. It's very similar to what business analytics. It's very similar in nature to what business analytics do in classical software development. However, knowledge is something that is really difficult to formalize in many cases, because unlikely to typical academic knowledge, like learning mathematical formula, right? VR is mostly used, or is in many cases used for delivering practical skills, right? And getting practical skills out of a mechanic that used to be repairing a gearbox of a car is really a tricky job. So basically, storyboard writers writes this storyboard together with him, or I got my airplane maintenance manual. It's also a storyboard. It's written, then the operations are written down. However, when you start implementing that, you need to be super agile, and you need to be super interactive with this mechanic. So he constantly looks at what you do and tells you like things like, you should not hold this range like this, you should hold it like this. So basically this gives another challenge that is again not new for software development, but manifestates really big in this part of it. Let's say this is a challenge of the cost control, because when you have like too many change requests, then costs start ramping up, right? So basically, key factor is educating is building a team, is building a proper teamwork, and building trust between all parts of the team, right? So that's it. So they need to learn how to work together, and this takes time. So I might be saying trivial things, right? But what we learned is that agile processes play much bigger role than in writing down, than in programming an ERP system for an insurance company that we still do actually. So we still do quite a lot of typical software, corporate software development. For this visual stuff, these agile processes are much more important. Teamwork is much more important. Trust is much more important. It's very close to design, visual, graphic design, but it's just another side of it.
So it sounds like having the right people involved is a big factor. Also, understanding from your subject matter expert what the steps are, but then on top of that, it's the nuance of those steps, and in that it's actually going through the motions with them, because there are changes to, it's not just what they say they do, it's how they do it that makes a difference for virtual reality.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the best case is actually send the development team to a factory or to a repair shop. So they sit together with those guys. But now we have COVID. We are super limited in travel. And well, we have to do it over the video.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's communication, it sounds like, is really key. So with virtual situations just like this one, when the person in the factory is going through the process of whatever it is that's being trained, communication, and especially I'm reaching around to touch something, or I'm, the third button down from the top, or whatever that is. So that way, whoever is tracking it actually knows what's happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. So communication is always a key. But when you speak about, well, the best thing about VR education is that you actually get your muscle memory, right? So when you sit in a virtual cockpit of an airplane, I try not to use this example, but it's the most vivid one, okay? So if you sit in a virtual cockpit of an airplane, you grab proper controls, like the one is here, the another one is here. Like in Piper, their trim tab is very not intuitive. So you need to be very good at your muscle memory to turn the proper whatever you need. So, but in order to translate it into VR, you need to see what the instructor actually is doing. So basically overcoming this distance and overcoming this communication issue is much more of a challenge than any other part of software.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some of the misconceptions that people have about workspace education with this industry?
Well, basically the amount of communication and the communicational challenges are much underestimated, I would say. Also, yeah, I think that's the best, that's the main one.
Okay.
So it's just as in any software development, it's all about communication.
Okay. And so people don't recognize exactly how much communication is necessary, especially with, in situations like this with COVID. What are some of the things that you do, and also you recommend that people do to combat those misconceptions, or to make sure that they're doing the right thing? I mean, how do you approach that, especially with a new customer, let's say, who doesn't realize how much communication is involved in the development process?
It's a good question, actually. The answer is, as usual, quite trivial, which says educate your customer and build proper expectations. But in many cases, it's very difficult to do that, because they come with their with they sometimes come as bosses and they say, we pay you work, right?
Mm.
And you need to be, let's say, politically correct to properly deliver the messages. On the other side, we have some freedom in doing that due to the high market demand, but still it's not, I don't think it's the best, how to put it. I don't think it's the best position and the best position to take. However, we just share our use cases. That's it.
Mm.
And we try to properly build the communication cycle and the let's say learning construction cycle. For example, with one of our customers, we always have a story. When they make a storyboard, then storyboard goes to a shelf, to a backlog. Then it gets back to implementation. What we noticed is that their vision of a storyboard changes over time, which is actually normal, but it changes quite a lot. So a simple measure of doing a revision of a storyboard and then doing a revision of our vision of implementation of a storyboard decreases the amount of changes by 50%. So that's it. Just just by rereading what was written months ago.
Interesting.
So that's yeah.
I would imagine that I think I know that just the idea of virtual reality, you see it and you take it for granted, but then when you look behind the curtain, if you will, at like a storyboard, for example, like you said, it becomes a little bit more apparent about everything that goes into it, and probably they can react from that storyboard and make some of the adjustments there too, and understand a little bit better, why you need more communication.
Oh, kind of that. I think that we're still in the beginning of the road, so we need to revisit this discussion in a year or two and see how it goes, because especially after new Facebook announcements.
Yes.
Especially after new Facebook announcements, because we just start realizing what is going on. I think that all this stuff that we are looking at, like monitors and notebooks, might be gone in a few years, or might go to a very deep niche in a few years. So the experience with building VR will, and especially education in VR, and new ideas will be booming.
You mentioned that for a company that VR is definitely more effective than sending people. So that's what benefits a company. What about the team that's being trained? How does the VR, AR, VR workplace training benefit them? What's the advantage to them?
Well, basically there are two main. I will say there are two main sources of benefits for them. One is the education itself. Like they get formal training, they know better on what to do, and also they get this muscle memory training without a risk of breaking some kind of expensive equipment. For example, we had a project that was planned to be done for Saudi Arabian Airlines and Saudi Arabian airports. The project was semi-suspended due to COVID and limitations on travel, but we managed to go through conceptual parts, so we managed to test the concept at least. The idea was that, and their problem is that they have to educate a lot of people who never had a clue of what is an airplane and what is a proper working culture in an airport. So basically, before they let those people get into the controlled environment of an airport, they at least need to make them get some basic knowledge and also do pre-selection, right? So first thing is that people get much more, the team itself gets much more relaxed. They are not afraid of burning themselves with a welding machine, or killing themselves with a tractor, or breaking an expensive part of an equipment or whatever. So people are more relaxed in training. Also, I, as a trainee, might want to experiment a little bit with the physics of what is going on, to understand without a risk for myself. Right? So they are not our customers because they do quite a lot of defense projects, but they are our close friends. So we see how their users, we can talk actually about how their users operate, and basically I reproduce the same behavior. So the guys are doing VR training for pilots and cabin crews. So basically, it's the first thing you do in a simulator is try to break an airplane, try to see the limitations, something that you will never do in a live airplane, right?
Mm-hmm.
So safety, ability to get basic knowledge faster, wow factor, just because it's cool, and it's fun to learn. Faster knowledge, which means that you are getting educated faster and you get to your job place faster and so on and so forth. So that's what comes from the training itself. Another part comes from the idea of automation of training. Like computer-based training is not new. There are quite a lot of learning management systems in the market, like Moodle or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that the benefit that they give is that your management, for you as a worker, is that your management actually sees what kind of training you have taken, what are your results. So basically, training can be formalized within the company, right? The content can be managed in a centralized way, which is good for the company, but it's also good for an employee. Because if I, as an employee, am active learning stuff, I pass the internal quizzes well, I get a lot of new knowledge. I'm enthusiastic about that. My managers will also see that what I'm doing. So probably I will get noticed more.
Mm.
So that's it.
Oh, that's great. That's all fantastic benefits. What you mentioned, you've kind of mentioned the various steps in your answers, but can you take me through or take us through the key elements of actually building an AR or VR education course?
Key elements of building a VR education course. Well, we need to go to first thing we need to understand the problem area. So what is the goal of our training? It's basically the very same to building a whatever course, a university course and an offline course, another computer-based course, whatever. So the medium is different. So basically, we need to understand the goal of the training. So what we expect people to learn and what we expect actually them to be able to do after this course, right? Mm-hmm. Secondly, we need to take the actual knowledge out from the knowledge from the person who holds the knowledge and write a storyboard and spruce it up with some interactivity. Like if we teach on using a dyno stand or a gas analyzer for emission testing in a car laboratory, we would probably prefer splitting it into smaller steps and letting users, let's say, answer some questions from a virtual trainer in this space, or do some task based on what they have just learned, just to fix up on their learning achievement, right? On their learning experience. So basically, we make a storyboard. Then we take this storyboard and we go to graphic designers and the technical team trying to estimate it. So we have an idea of a budget needed for the implementation. We know that this budget will be more or less rough because changes might come and new features will be added, some features will be removed, and so on and so forth. But we still need to. But as we are a contracted company, we still need to get on that. And after everything is approved, we just go and implement it into usual sprints as it's done in any software development. However, keeping the customer or keeping the knowledge holder and the storyboard writer in the loop is a critical part of it. So let's say doing bi-weekly reviews or whatever kind of reviews, so they see it in increments, so we can manage the changes before, let's say, it's too late. Basically, what I describe is a typical Scrum-like process. It's nothing new.
Well, I would imagine that your subject matter expert does some of the testing, though, right? Because they would be sitting in the driver's seat, so to speak, or the pilot seat, making sure that indeed the output is exactly how, or at least a representation of how they would they would perform the activities, correct, or not?
Kind of, and you can imagine how mechanics from a factory can do this type of testing.
Yeah.
So basically, a lot is done by the storyboard writers.
Mm.
A lot is done by the storyboard writers. So, and actually QA is done in two steps. So thank you for mentioning that. So basically, actual QA is done by two steps. First one is technical stuff, which so QA makes sure the experience is free of bugs and free of what we define as a bug, like when something is not working, right? So when you take a wrench and you cannot take a wrench. And another part of testing is really done by the learning expert, I would say.
Mm.
Either our one or the customer's one, or maybe even the knowledge holder.
Okay. Right. So yeah, QA is obviously an important part of this. So fantastic. Well, this is my list of questions that we prepared for today. Is there anything else, Katya, that you would like me to cover? Or I feel like we've gotten some fantastic information here.
Yeah, I think we did get some fantastic information. I myself had a question as well listening to you. You tapped a little bit into, you mentioned Facebook Metaverse, and it would be nice to learn about your attitude because I believe they're releasing it mostly for entertainment part. But do you see future for education in Metaverse?
I'm really afraid, but I see future for everything in Metaverse. Because we have one of the big tech companies, similar in size to Google. I think they are bigger than Microsoft, maybe. I don't know. I don't really follow. Trying to aggressively change the way we consume, we communicate over the internet, right? So first step in this way was just email and Unix to Unix connection protocol back in the ages. Second one was web and text pages with these GIF-based animations. Then we started having video and audio content and video calls and voice calls and so on and so forth, and what we call heavier content. Now they are changing the media. Then actually everything started being mobile, and smartphones totally killed mobile phones. However, a smartphone is probably 10 times more expensive than a button-based phone, right? Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic. So the much cheaper product was replaced by a 10 times more expensive product, right? And everything went mobile. And now we are actually faced the total change of medium. So instead of having a computer screen, which is flat and which sits in the real world, and a keyboard and a mouse and so on and so forth, we are being driven into a totally virtual world. So they actually try moving out the competitors' devices just by creating a totally different way of consumption of basically the same thing. It's not only about entertainment. Entertainment is the market driver. It's like me playing computer games when I was 6 years old, and those games drove me to the internet and drove my attention to that. When Intel was actually pushing AGP video slots and video cards, which was some kind of new technology in the year of 2000 probably. The first thing they do was bundling a video game with it, so new graphics could attract attention. But basically, this new this new hardware format that allowed higher throughput of the data to the video card was then used by whatever kinds of applications, right? So now Facebook is driving everybody to buy the devices just for entertainment. However, productivity applications like virtual desktops and so on and so forth, virtual meeting rooms are already there. They are not yet too mature, but they are already in place, right? So I think that at some point of view, in some point of time, we will have very much mixed experience. Like there will be VR avatar of a professor doing lecture in the VR environment, and this lecture will be mixed up with VR hands-on trainings and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, that's really cool. I agree with you that it starts with entertaining. It's like a hook, and then you are used to a new way of information, of getting the information, and you can't get away from it. One last question is, are you planning to invest in real estate in Metaverse?
No.
Not yet.
No, never.
Never.
Well, just because, just because I would rather invest in the knowledge of my team and myself.
Yeah.
That's because real estate, oil. The Stone Age ended. The Stone Age ended not because the stock of stones was depleted, right?
Yeah.
So basically, knowledge is the new oil and new capital and new energy and so on and so forth. So I'd rather invest in learning myself and in my people getting more understanding of what is going on.
Agree. So I'm out
So
of
that's
questions.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and still for me, those blockchain-based kittens or blockchain-based pieces of art, they look really strange. So I'm too old for this.
Yeah.
Actually, one more topic that I wanted to cover. Actually, I mentioned it during answering one of your questions. Was that with VR development, at least as of now, but as for the future as well, actually VR experience itself is basically 20% of the work. 80% of the work is still management of those experiences, integration, learning recording systems, learning management systems, integration of this learning into the corporate environments. So just the company can see how people educate themselves and basically combine their learning with their KPI management or whatever. Like you are not doing well on your sales in your McDonald's, so please get this training to upgrade your soft skills on your work at the cash desk is more productive or faster or whatever. And now please do it in VR, because VR actually is quite good for soft skills trainings. Still, this content needs to be, so if we create some kind of digital content, we need to create it once and distribute everywhere, right? So we need a secure means of storing this stuff, allowing exchanging this stuff maybe even between companies, distributing it to the users and managing the way the users learn, right? So that's actually, I would say that this is probably the 80% of the work and 80% of our work. And what is funny is that it doesn't differ much from what we do in creating an ERP system for an insurance company, or I don't know, automation of superannuation funds or whatever. It's still the same technology, it's still the same desktop yet and whatever and so on. So basically, even the media isn't yet changed. It will for sure with the Metaverse, but it will be in the future.
Thank you.
So what I wanted to say is that when you think about VR, the VR itself is just a part of the iceberg that is above the water. But the back end of it, let's say business back end of it, is not less important.